Hi, welcome to the BD Roundtable. We're here today with Ben Paul. Ben is the founder of the BD Ladder, a BD and marketing consultancy based in New Zealand. Now on the call, we're going to be talking about the top 3 sales techniques that BD teams can teach their lawyers when speaking with prospective clients in meetings, all without being too salesy. Now, if you want to join us at the BD Roundtable and participate in the Q&A session of these interviews, head on over to bdroundtable.com to sign up to become a member. And when you do, you get access to our private Slack group community, which is full of legal marketers like yourself, and it's great for bouncing ideas off one another and building your network. Now, without further ado, here is Ben Paul talking about the top 3 techniques for asking better client questions. Now, you having previously worked in law firms and you have some very good experience, attracting lawyers, and now you're doing some more B2B consulting. So I wanted to get you on the call today to really discuss, one, how we can coach our lawyers to be better at asking questions and better in the client meetings. And one thing I found very odd is, one, lawyers don't get any sort of BD training when they go to law school. So when they're actually, working in a law firm and they're placed in these meetings, they could use some help, right? So can you talk a little bit about that lack of training and how you can really help lawyers get into this sort of sales mindset, as it were?
Yeah, I think what's happened over the years is there's obviously been a recognition that lawyers need clients, and so they realise that more and more it's a competitive world and they do need these BD and marketing skills. But what often happens in most traditional firms is that real grunty BD training doesn't kick in until they get to the sort of senior associate level just before partner. And then sometimes it only really starts at the partner level. There's a lot of focus on billable hours, doing the work, become a technical expert and knowing your trade, and that's all well and good. The trouble is when you've gone through that extended period of your time and then at the end you're being asked to suddenly develop these different skills and a different approach to how you interact with clients and how you talk to them, the types of questions you ask. So trying to build rapport and ask open-ended questions rather than trying to show and demonstrate your expertise is a very different approach, and it's a different mindset. So the really good firms and those globally that are doing it well will start that training as soon as someone comes in. What a lot of firms do is say, okay, well, our junior lawyers are going to go to some networking events. Let's get the BD team or the marketing team to run them a basic networking training course. And while that's useful, I don't actually think that cuts it anymore. I think there's a lot more to BD. There's a lot more required than just holding a conversation at a networking event to get a card to then try and get a meeting for the partner. I think there's a lot more that can be done early on. So it makes that transition later in career a lot easier.
Right. Now, before we get into what we should do you have some things about what we shouldn't do? Like when you're in a meeting with a client, you mentioned asking open-ended questions. What are some of the key things that you've seen lawyers do wrong on a routine basis?
Being over keen to actually sell is one of the biggest things that you will see lawyers do. When you come from a position of wanting to demonstrate and show that you're credible and you're expert and you meet someone for the first time, it's very tempting to start talking about your organization. Bring in lots of stats which ultimately may sound impressive to you, but have no relevance or benefit to the person you're talking to. So the classics are usually, we have X number of people, we're in 25 countries, we've got 14 offices in your location or whatever it might be, 7 partners. The minute you start talking that, and I started to bore myself from that conversation, the other person's eyes glaze over. They're just stats that have no real meaning. And it's too early as well to get into the sales pitch. You have to take time to actually understand what's going on with that person, your potential client, what's important to them, and be a little bit more prepared to have an open conversation, so that a lot of lawyers don't want to talk about things other than the law. So when you're meeting a client, they have business issues. So one of the classic mistakes is to narrow that conversation straight down into what their legal issues might be and what their legal challenges are, when actually they have business challenges and business opportunities. They're sort of the classic mistakes, being too quick to pitch and also narrowing the conversation down, and also in a way controlling the other person, controlling the agenda, saying you're comfortable, not what the client's comfortable talking about.
Right, right. Yes. Who really cares if you have 18 offices and you have, all that sort of stuff? And they should probably already know that ahead of time because they've probably looked at your website. So, all right, let's get into it. So you're in the meeting. You've just sat down. What are the three techniques that we can relay to our lawyers?
I think the first thing is to ask a really simple question around what the other person wants to get out of that time with you. So throw the agenda over to the client you're meeting. Now that can
get them talking, right?
Yeah, get them talking, but it can seem quite scary because straight away you've lost control. You don't know what that will be. So and most lawyers, let's face it, are in that personality of wanting to have control and be the lead. You're actually letting the client lead. You're saying, this is your 30 minutes where we're going to have a conversation and unpack some stuff and try and help you. What do you want to cover today? What are you hoping to get out of this session? What information do you need to relay to me? That straight away changes the dynamic of the whole meeting. It lessens the pressure because suddenly it's not a sales pitch. It's a getting to know you and building rapport and understanding session.
Well, as you were saying, that kind of reminds me of like when you go to the doctor, right? When you go to the doctor that you've never met, they don't start talking about themselves the whole time. They ask you, so what's wrong? How can I help you? You walk into that situation with the understanding that they're the expert, they know what they're talking about, and it's really up for the patient to describe what the issues are. So when you're in a client meeting, get them talking first, ask them what are the issues, seems pretty common sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, go with that mindset of being curious. So don't go with a sales mindset. Don't go with a set objective to try and pitch for work or try and send a proposal, but go with that mindset of how much can I find out about this person and what's important to them? What are the things that are most important? What do they need help with? And quite often that help won't be stuff that relates to what the lawyer does. And that's great because there's ways you can help them with your network or sending them information, or someone else in your firm might have a contact that can help them. And it's really going back to, as David Maister would say, trying to be that trusted advisor, being that source of information, that one person that if the client has an issue or wants to talk through where they would get help, you're that person they call. And that's where we want to get our lawyers to be with their clients, that trusted advisor.
Well, do you have any advice on how we can broach that topic first? Like what should a lawyer say when they first sit down? You can't just say, so tell me about your problems. Like how do you ease into that? What can you say?
So a normal conversation, when people have done the pleasantries of how's business and how's things going, is, so how are things going is a great conversation, and people will give you an answer, and you can kind of judge their personality by that answer. If they go straight into things are going, oh, things are terrible, we're struggling, things are hard now. So you might then go with so what are the challenges? What are the three things that you're struggling with right now? Can you tell me a little bit more about those and what do you think's holding you back? But if they're like everything's super, you might go a different way and say, well, it's good to hear business is going great. How can we help you go even better? What's the next opportunities that you're looking to drive that business forward?
Right.
But straight away you're getting into a conversation now that's relevant to them and changing the dynamic, rather than them asking you, so how can you help me? Because you can't answer that question until you know what's going on in their business and really understand them, and you can't get that from a website.
All right. So tip one, get them talking about the problems, skip all of the introductory, capability statements and all that.
Yeah.
And be curious, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it always amazes me, if you go and see a new startup or a new business or a cool tech business and they've got all these things, wouldn't you want to know about what they're doing?
Yeah.
I would.
And also, I find that a lot of these startups, they have unique business models that aren't the traditional models, or so there's a lot for the lawyer to go in to learn about. Okay, what's next? So get them talking. What's another way we can help?
I think listen.
Okay.
And it sounds really simple, but how do you demonstrate you're listening? Sometimes people want to talk and share and air what's going on in their mind and what their thoughts and problems are. They don't necessarily want you to solve them. You might feel a little bit like you're a counsellor, but actually hanging back and just listening and showing that does sound like that's a problem for you. It does sound that's difficult to face. What do you see you're doing next? These types of questions are good. Help that person along with their thinking. Stay engaged. Because there's a danger sometimes people ask a lot of series of open questions to the point that someone says, oh, well, what I'm struggling with, for example, if an IP lawyer is there, is I'm worried about brand protection in this region. Great, now I'm going to talk because you've actually given me the opening to talk about my stuff. And it doesn't feel like you're being listened to. The person's just waiting for an opportunity to fix a problem they can fix and they can take your money. And if you're on the client side, that's not how you want to be listened to. So it's a much slower approach where you always lessen your own self-interest and just listen and move forward through that process.
In one of our intro calls, you mentioned the power of silence and how just a few seconds of silence can really get them talking. Can you talk a little bit about the power of silence and how we can use that to our advantage?
So this is one of the oldest techniques in negotiation. And I started my career off with those glorious days of B2B telesales, where you make 40 odd calls a day. And what you soon realize is when you pause, someone wants to fill that silence. And quite often the person you're speaking to will fill it. Now, in the old days of negotiation, that will start, if you pause when you're getting into negotiation on price, the first person to talk will make a concession. I know you've had the likes of Colin Jasper and they're more into high level negotiations, but the basic level, that's how it works. And the same works when you're talking with clients. So if you hold and pause for a time, let them think, they'll fill that space. And it's a really good thing when you're doing your feedback on pitches and stuff as well, just to hold silence.
Right. It's very powerful, even just now, having the silence.
It can make you feel a little bit uncomfortable as well if you're of that personality type that doesn't like silence.
Right. Well, I mean, getting the client talking, revealing information that they may not thought they would reveal can really be a benefit. And this is especially important when you're, maybe doing a pre-pitch interview or phone call, and you want to really suss out a few of these, some of this information that they're not really ready to give up. So that's a good tip. So again, just to recap: 1, get them talking.
Yeah.
I'd stay curious. 2, listen, right? And not just listen for an opportunity to talk about yourself, but really listen to what they're saying. What's next? What's the third tip?
You need actions. If you haven't managed to get actions in the meeting, you haven't had a successful meeting. But don't force actions that shouldn't be there. So the typical meeting that you'll find lawyers and other professional services will go and have with their clients, at the end, they're not quite sure what happens next. So they'll ask the dreaded question, can I send you a proposal? Can I send you a capability statement?
That's
Yikes.
not a good sign. Yeah.
No. And I think it's done in a lot of ways just to have an action so they can go back to the office and take the pressure off. And for a lot of people, you can get the BD and marketing team busy producing something glossy that no one ever reads. And the reason they don't read it is because it's too early in the cycle. And we're not really sure what we want to say other than the generic about we can help you with this. And they always read quite generic. The better question to ask is to the client, what do you see as the next steps? How would you like to proceed?
Mm.
Straight away, they'll tell you what they're looking for. And then don't assume you know what they want just because they say something. So going back to that example, if they do say, for example, can you send me a proposal? Ask them what they're looking for in that proposal. What do they want to see? Well, I've used this when I've coached quite a few people around this, particularly lawyers. What they found out is actually it's as simple as a fee letter sometimes. They just want to know what the terms of engagement are, or they just want a couple of questions answered. Sometimes they just want them to flick a reference to someone else they've worked with. Because they're not looking for a full glossy. What they're looking for is the next bit of information to help them in their buying process.
Right.
And that's the important thing we have to have in our mind, that while we may have a sales process, if that's not aligned to the buying process, it's just a process that will drive you to a dead-end street, in effect. You need to make sure it's aligned to how the buyer's thinking, where they are in the journey, and check in with them. So ask questions which might seem like they have obvious answers, because you'll be surprised that they have less obvious answers and they bring real clarification. Always check in, and it demonstrates great listening as well. Just checking what the client actually wants.
Yep. And just confirm, reconfirm, and make sure
Yep.
it's clear, because no need to waste time preparing something that they're not even going to use.
Yes.
Now, you have experience consulting with lawyers. You know how to train and coach lawyers. Oftentimes, the BD teams and marketing teams are asked to fill that role.
Yep.
So what advice would you give us on the call, these BD marketers who are asked to prepare some training modules for lawyers? Any top pieces of advice?
I think there's two different questions there, right? So there's one around training and one around coaching. And in a way, they're interlinked. The first thing is to actually find out what your internal people are looking for, what their expectations are. And your job is to build trust with them, much like you're trying to ask them to build an understanding with their clients. You need to build that understanding with them. You need to demonstrate listening and understanding what's important to them, and define your coaching and training around that. It's very easy and simple to run a generic training program, and these days I'm doing less and less of the training side of it. When I do go in and train, I will find out exactly what people are wanting and what they're trying to achieve from that training. And I won't proceed unless there's a coaching program after it. Because otherwise you get that nice sort of 1 or 2 hour entertainment session and no follow through. And that doesn't help your internal brand as a BD professional who actually drives results and drives revenue for the business. And that's the brand I'm assuming that most BD professionals will want within their firms, is to actually be the person you go to for advice when you need it, how to get client-centric thinking, how to get on their agenda. And through that, you'll need to intimately understand each partner or each lawyer's market, who their key client targets are, who they want to get close to. All those questions you'll need to understand to help drive them forward. And then you have the platform and ability to coach them. But until you've established that rapport, there's no reason why they would go to you.
Yeah. Like we always ask the lawyers to be seen as a trusted advisor for their clients. We need to practice what we preach, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, because there's no reason just because they're paying your salary that they'll use you. And in fact, one of the reasons why I enjoy consulting, having been in-house, is actually they're more likely to listen to a consultant, even if they're saying very similar things to the internal person, because they feel that there's a credibility and expertise on paying someone on a daily or an hourly rate to come and talk to them, as opposed to someone they see every day at the coffee machine. It just changes the dynamic of how they think. But that doesn't mean you can't do it internally. You've just got to work harder to build that rapport.
Right.
and that platform. But when you've got it in with the internal person, it's going to be really, really effective because you can do it in the moment when required at any given time. And then you become indispensable to them and provide real value.
Well, I have some very specific questions about that and some platforms we can use, but I'll save that for the Q&A session for the BD Roundtable. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, where can the viewers get in touch with you?
Then get in touch with me. LinkedIn's a great way. You can find me on there, and my website's super easy. It's bdladder.com.
Okay, we'll link everything in the description below. So thank you so much, Ben, for taking the time to speak with us.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, so Ben, I mean, I've been in these calls or in these meetings a lot. And usually, as you know, the client comes in, the lawyer comes in, and there's a bit of awkward silence. And then we talk about the weather, we talk about sports, and then we figure out, okay, who's going to go first? So usually the lawyer says, okay, let us introduce ourselves. And then the client introduces themselves. And then after that, that's like 15 minutes wasted. What's a better way to, what's a better way to approach that? You know, that seems like the standard protocol. Is there another way?
Yeah, I think you can have a verbal agenda about what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve in that meeting. And if someone's agreed to meet with you, and the most precious thing for busy people is time, is actually agree up front what they're trying to get out of that meeting. If there's a clear objective and a clear value to be had in that meeting, let's state it up front, and then the conversation will flow. While it's nice to have a chat about sport or how the weather is, what we really want to get into is in this 30 minutes, let's introduce ourselves and let's get into talking about your business and your objectives and the things you're trying to achieve. And then we can move the conversation forward. But the quicker you get to the point of the reason why we're here today is to discuss this and go through that. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll get to this point. The easier it is to then get straight into that conversation.
Okay. All right. Before I ask some other questions, does anyone else on the call have any questions for Ben?
Hi, Will. It's Maricar. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Ben. You raised a good point about, you know, whenever advisors are in a client meeting, they have a tendency to sell the firm rather than ask questions to the client. So, so my question is to what type of training do you recommend for onboarding? So any new lawyers that come in, we can fix it at that point. So what trainings do you recommend for new lawyers?
I would.
Good question for you as a consultant. I would.
Yeah. In a non-self-serving way, I'm not going to recommend myself, but what I would say is it's really important to have a consistent approach. So whether you pick the challenger sale, whether you pick spin, whether you pick whatever methodology you pick, and there's a raft out there and consultants pick and choose bits from all of them, have that consistent approach to what you do. Make it clear that the way to business isn't to sell, but is to listen and have a curious mindset and start to try and develop that. And then what you'll find is as people on board, particularly the younger lawyers, but all lawyers will actually take advice from other lawyers. So your best advocates are those that you've got on board from within the partnership, who will then help and tell these stories and reinforce it. And then have regular sessions with these new onboarders so that you've got a check-in point at 2 weeks, get feedback on their meetings. After every first client or sales meeting, there should be an email that's sent to the client that recaps what happened in that meeting and what the agreed next steps were. That's just a really good best practice. Those are actually a really good sign for you if you weren't present in the meeting to understand if open questions were asked. Because if the whole thing rolls around, we told you about this, we told you about that, and now we're going to send you a cap stack, you can see the problems aren't that. So having that regular check-in can then reinforce and say, well, hang on, what could you have done better in that meeting? What question do you wish you'd asked? Is a really good coaching question to ask someone. Which question do you think you missed? What more did you want to learn from that client?
Okay, thank you.
Also, Ben, I've been in meetings where there is maybe one person from the client side and then 6 lawyers on the other side of the table. One from real estate, one from IP, one the managing partner, and then the BD person and all that. Any feedback on that? I think we know what you're going to say, but for those who may not know.
I mean, put yourself in your client's shoes. Who wants to meet 6 lawyers in the first meeting? Or 6 any serious professionals who you all think are there. It can start feeling like an interrogation. Either you've got 5 people not saying anything and 2 people talking, or you've got a massive questions all coming in and you feel under the pump. It's just not a relaxed environment. The need to, I think it's around having enough confidence in your colleagues to be able to carry the conversation and introduce you when the time is right, rather than feeling you have to be there. I think everyone has to try and avoid FOMO. The whole concept of fear of missing out is quite real. And if you're fear driven, which people who are trained to find risks tend to be, you have that real fear of missing out. But actually, it's better to not try and do everything in the first meeting. And there's almost a sense of keeping the client curious as well and wanting them to come back for more.
Okay, I have another one. So when we come to talking about fees and price sensitivity, because it's a discussion that we all need to have, and we kind of want to know how much money do they have to spend on this, right? So we know how to price appropriately. What's a good way to bring this topic up? Like, like, would you say, like, do you mind if I ask about your fee sensitivity? No, that doesn't sound right. So what questions can we use to ask or get some insight on their pricing sensitivities?
I think anytime you start asking a question that's related to what's your budget, how price sensitive are you, how important are the fees, you're opening yourself up to discount land straight away. I would expect that you would rather ask a question, how important is this to you right now? Where does this sit in your priority list? So actually you're finding out how important the matter that you're engaged in is important to them. That gives you a clue as to how much they'll be looking to pay on it.
That's a good point. Where does this sit on your priority list?
Yeah.
I've written that down. I'm going to put that in our training deck. That's good. Any other questions like that?
Some people will sometimes ask things like, what would it mean if this didn't end well for you? I mean, I tend to prefer what's the outcome you're looking to achieve, and what would that mean to you in the business? Would you achieve it? So what you're trying to find is the value of the piece of work to them in a business sense, not trying to get it done. If you're in a simple transaction where they just need it done for compliance sake, then already you know it's going to be more price sensitive. You're in a commodity land. But look around their desk. If they've got nice pens from other law firms, you're in a competitive situation.
I guess we should be fairly open if they're reaching out to other law firms. Can you ask openly about that, or do you just keep it to yourself?
And this tends to differ from most jurisdictions. I find that lawyers are terrible gossip. So I think sometimes that everyone knows if they've seen a new client or not. And sometimes you pass each other in the street and in the halls when you're going into meetings. So it's quite easy to see. there's no right or wrong around whether you ask it. You wonder what value is that information known they've seen through other law firms anyway. If there's someone in there who you know is underpricing, are you going to change your pricing because they're price cutting? I'd advocate that you shouldn't. You should hold firm. Find the value and link your service and what you're offering to the value you'll provide and the benefit they'll get and the outcome they'll achieve, so that price becomes less of an issue. Because if someone's just pitching on price, they won't necessarily win. I think it's the Belgian procurement model where when they take fees in from people, they cut out the highest and they remove the bottom one. So actually being cheapest won't necessarily win you the work. But that's an education piece for your partners to understand as well.
Right. Also, another thing that I try to teach the lawyers is not every client is a good client, right? These meetings are also a two-way street to see if you want them as a client. So what are some red flags that signify a bad client, or what are some questions that we can throw out there which would make it very clear that they want to be a good client?
Do you know, there's an interesting reflection on that. When one of your lawyers comes out of a meeting and said, "Oh, that was really hard work. I found that meeting painful, but hopefully we'll get some work from it." And there's a question straight up now, because if you found for half an hour of your time that you had to adjust everything you did, you were pulling teeth, you didn't enjoy the conversation, it was just hard, you're not going to have a long-term relationship with them for 2-3 years. You're going to dread that phone call. Maybe if you feel that it is someone that's appropriate for your firm, that's when you should introduce a colleague. Because actually you might look at it and go, well, actually they're closer to Bob or Jane down the hall. They'll build a better rapport, right? I think a great question to sort of ask them is, have you used, in your external providers or other external lawyers you've used, what 3 things have you enjoyed and which 3 things have you not liked so much? So just ask that question about what they found they're good and what hasn't worked for them. That's useful for you to know, but also you might find in some of those answers there's some curlies in there that actually means you potentially don't want to enjoy them. Where do they see this relationship going? What kind of relationship do they want with their new lawyer? Understanding that, and they're good questions to ask, and they're ones you'd expect to be asked as a client, will give you a real feel about whether you want this as a client or not.
Okay, great. Also, I have another question. More often now, law firms are asking the BD teams to join these meetings. I've heard from the BD roundtable members that, the BD managers are now in these meetings. So what is the role of a BD manager in these meetings, apart from just being a fly on the wall and taking notes? Like, what value can we bring? Because yes, we do the prep work for the meeting, and hopefully we're doing some research onto the client, and we're sharing this with the partners so they go into the meeting with some understanding about the issues facing the client. But when we're actually in the meeting, what role would a BD manager have there? And how do we step on the lawyer's toes and,
I think the role is to listen intently and then change the conversation when it gets stuck. So having the courage for the benefit of your partner, so it's almost like you're demonstrating you have their back, ask that question. So just say, I'm just mindful of time. Do you mind if I just butt in for a second? I know we've been at half an hour. We've been going for 15 minutes now about the ins and outs of the latest litigation law. Is this something that you want to carry on talking, or do you want to talk about the other 2 or 3 things that we said we're going to try and cover off today? Just mindful of time and wanting to make sure you get what you need out of it to the client. That's really useful. It will open up the conversation. It still gives them options of where they want to go. but having that courage to ask those questions.
Yeah, because before you know it, you have the two people talking and the time's already run out and you haven't even gotten to the agenda points. And then the next meeting runs. Yeah, so the BD managers can help keep the meeting on track and really, guide it into where it needs to go, making sure that.
Yeah, and ask a wider question. Just say, look, this has been really fascinating conversation that we've had today. Just one thing I picked up from what you're saying. Is there more than that, and how does it fit into the wider business, the wider operations here? That just changes the dynamic. Or you might just say, that's fascinating, and you're focused on achieving this project right now, or what you need help with. But once you've achieved that, what's the next thing for you, and where do you see it going in the next few years? Just stretching the thinking so you understand them more.
All right. And then after the meeting, what's the one thing that the BD manager should be, if they've participated in the meeting, what should they be doing? Keeping the lawyers on track to follow up, or how?
Yeah. So post meeting, the best idea was if you sit down with a laptop in the car park or in the coffee next door, write that follow up meeting and send it. Like, get that note out. It's impressive.
Yeah, because if you
faster the better.
Yeah, after the meeting, you're probably jump on another things, and then before you know, it's been 2 days, and you still got to write that follow-up email. So just build it into your schedule to leave 15 minutes after the meeting to do it.
Yeah, it should only take 10 minutes. It should just be literally bullet points and what you agreed to do next. Don't have to do the thing that you agreed to do next in that email. That's the second email. If you agree to provide some information, that's the next email that comes in 3 or 4 days' time. Don't hold off on what's agreed. That also is useful because if they've agreed to do something and provide you some information, you can put the timescales in there, and it gives you a reason to chase them up in a professional way. And it's a nice reminder, and it just demonstrates a really good way of working.
And is it appropriate for the BD person to send that follow-up email to the lawyers and the client, or should we pass that on to the lawyer to send to the client?
Going to go with the classic depends.
Yeah.
It depends how much of a rapport and who's trying to build the rapport and who's got the relationship. You can go in these meetings and they may end up talking more to the BD manager and less so to partner, or equal to both. Then it's great to do that. What I would say though is if it's a long term, you're building a client relationship, and they're ultimately going to be looked after by the lawyers. And as soon as it gets into paid work, if the BD are going onto the next project and less so with that client, it makes sense for it to come from the partner or one of the lawyers. It just starts the flow of communication how you want it to be.
All right. That's all of my questions I have. We're coming up on time. So does anyone else have any questions? Derek, Constance, Daphne? All right. Now, thank you so much, Ben, for sharing these insights. You mentioned at the beginning of the call, you're going to be writing an ebook.
Yes.
What's that going to be about?
So the ebook is around how to get meetings, how to get meetings with clients, how to get meetings with prospects. And it covers on one of my favorite topics, which is how to get second meetings. So quite often we didn't do a very good job in the first meeting. We struggled to get a second meeting. One of the traditional problems we're seeing with a lot of law firms at the moment. So I've got, I think it's around 8 global experts have all given their opinions on these various topics, and we'll be releasing an ebook early next week. Okay,
so by the time we get this video out, that should be up on your website. So
yeah.
We'll be able to put a link to that from your website, so people, BD Roundtable members, will be able to download that and get access to that.
Yeah, awesome. I'll definitely send you a link when it's up and running as well.
All right, and what are other services that maybe the BD Roundtable members might come to you for? So you do general consulting on BD and marketing, but you have a specific specialty?
Yeah, so the specialties are, in my local market, I do a BD and marketing director on call. So for those teams that need my kind of experience but want it on a so many days a month retainer basis, we do that. There's a coaching package, which is around a partner director startup. So really get them to understand their plans and their growth plans and what they need to do, and then coach them all the way through. And there's the whole training and coaching. So a lot of what we discussed today as well for those BD professionals, if they need help in what they're doing, I can coach them to build better relationships with their partners so that they can achieve the things that they want to achieve. So it's coaching the BD teams to effectively work and engage with their partners.
All right, excellent. Thanks. We look forward to seeing that. And for all of you on the call, please do connect with Ben on LinkedIn. He has some nice videos that he's been putting out, and he's only just getting started. So
Yes.
keep a lookout for that. All right, guys, that should be it. Thanks so much for joining, everyone.